In the city of Holiday, a suburb of Salt Lake City, Utah, Toni Marie Baird was born. From early childhood, she stood out with her charisma and zest for life. A blonde with bright blue eyes, Toni always attracted attention with her genuine smile. Her parents, Dana Anderson and Casey Baird, divorced when Toni was only 1 year old but maintained a friendly relationship for their daughter's sake. Toni grew up in an atmosphere of love and support. Her father, Casey, recalled that his daughter always had many friends who were drawn to her. She was a natural leader, able to unite people around her. At school, Toni quickly became popular, had a wide circle of friends, and numerous admirers. Meanwhile, in another part of Utah, in the city of Ogden, Victoria Ashley Mendoza was growing up. Her life was strikingly different from Toni's. Victoria was born into a family of immigrants from Mexico who lived in poverty. When Victoria was only 10 years old, her father committed suicide, which became a turning point in her life. After her father's death, Victoria's behavior changed dramatically. She began running away from home, skipping school, and getting into fights. She had problems with the law and was repeatedly sent to juvenile detention centers. 2 years before meeting Toni, Victoria had 12 court warnings and 8 contempt of court charges. Despite her troubled past, Victoria had her own appeal. She was slim, with soft facial features, but her street wisdom and tough character gave her a special charm that attracted many teenagers. While Victoria struggled with the consequences of a difficult childhood, Toni lived an ordinary suburban teenager's life. She studied at Salt Lake City College and worked as an assistant accountant. Toni had ambitious dreams. She wanted to become a famous singer and dreamed of living in California by the ocean. It seemed that the paths of these two girls would never cross. But fate had other plans. When Toni turned 17, she found herself in a situation that radically changed her life. One evening, Toni was riding in a car with a group of older friends, smoking marijuana. They were stopped by a police officer who searched the vehicle. Drugs and paraphernalia were found in the back seat. Realizing that her friends, being older, could receive more severe punishment, Toni took the blame. This act, dictated by loyalty to her friends, had serious consequences. Toni was charged with possession of controlled substances, which under Utah law is considered a serious offense. Her father, Casey, concerned about the situation and having his own experience with addiction, tried to influence the situation through his daughter's probation officer. However, the justice system proved unyielding. As a result, Toni was placed under the custody of the Division of Child and Family Services and placed in foster care with her aunt. She was subsequently sent to a youth treatment center for 90 days. For a girl from a well-off family, this was a real shock. She found herself surrounded by teenagers with serious problems, including gang members and drug addicts. The first days at the center were extremely difficult for Toni. Her mother recalls how her daughter constantly cried on the phone. Toni, who was used to the comfort of home life, found herself in a completely foreign and hostile environment. But it was here, in the most unexpected place, that she met the person who would change her entire life, Victoria Mendoza. At the youth treatment center, Toni and Victoria quickly found common ground. For Victoria, this wasn't her first time in such a facility, and she took on the role of protector and guide for Toni in this new world. Toni, who felt lost and scared, found in Victoria a source of strength and confidence. Despite the obvious differences in their backgrounds and characters, the girls discovered that they were united by a shared passion for music. Both loved writing psalm lyrics and dreamed of a career in the music industry. This shared love became the foundation of their growing closeness. During their stay at the center, Victoria received devastating news. Her mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. Toni became her support during this difficult period, which further strengthened their bond. When the time came for a parent visit, Toni introduced Victoria to her mother, Dana. It was then that Toni came out, informing her mother about her sexual orientation and that Victoria was her girlfriend. Dana, demonstrating unconditional love and acceptance, supported her daughter in her choice. After completing the 90-day term, Toni was released from the center. Over the next month, the girls maintained contact through letters. In one of them, Victoria wrote a phrase that later proved prophetic: "If you sleep with anyone else besides me, I might kill you. I'm serious." When it was time for Victoria's release, Toni, along with her father Casey, came to pick her up. Casey later recalled that he immediately felt some apprehension about his daughter's new friend. Victoria was strikingly different from Toni's usual circle, and something about her caused Casey to feel uneasy. However, understanding the importance of this relationship for his daughter, he decided to accept her choice. Instead of returning home to her sick mother, Victoria went to live with Toni's family. Dana and Casey opened their home to Victoria, trying to create a safe and supportive environment for her. Toni introduced Victoria to her friends, particularly her best friend Lacey. The first meeting left mixed impressions. Lacey noticed that Victoria was a bit rough around the edges, but also noted the strong connection between the girls. In the first months of their relationship, everything seemed perfect. Toni and Victoria were inseparable, spending every free minute together. Their social media profiles were filled with photos of a happy couple that looked stylish and in love. However, behind the facade of the perfect relationship, troubling signs gradually began to appear. Victoria showed signs of jealousy and insecurity. She was particularly sensitive to the attention Toni received from boys. Unlike the self-confident Toni, Victoria constantly felt threatened by other people. Toni's friends began to notice changes in her behavior. She started communicating less with her former acquaintances, especially with boys. Some friends began to drift away, not wanting to be involved in the complicated relationship. Others, like Lacey, decided to stay close, trying to support their friend. Lacey quickly realized that it was better not to anger Victoria. She had a short fuse and could react sharply to the slightest provocation. This created an atmosphere of tension even during ordinary friendly gatherings. Despite these warning signs, Toni seemed blindly devoted to Victoria. She justified her behavior, explaining to friends and family that Victoria just needed love and understanding because of her difficult past. In June 2012, 2 years after the start of their relationship, Victoria's mother died of cancer. This was another blow for Victoria, who was now left without parents and without a job. Toni's family, especially her parents Dana and Casey, supported Victoria during this difficult period. They invited her to live with them permanently, essentially accepting her as a family member. After Victoria's mother's death, the relationship between the girls became even more intense. Victoria was completely dependent on Toni and her family, which intensified her fear of loss. This led to an escalation of her controlling behavior and jealousy. Toni, who had always been friendly and sociable, now found herself under constant surveillance by Victoria. Every contact she had with other people, especially boys, provoked a violent reaction from Victoria. She demanded constant explanations from Toni about her communication and whereabouts. Despite this, Toni continued to present their relationship as ideal on social media. Photos of the couple hugging, relaxing together, or attending parties created an illusion of a happy and carefree life. However, the reality was quite different. Toni's grandmother later noted that the couple's relationship had become very codependent and unhealthy. Victoria was jealous of Toni's relationships with other people, but skillfully masked her behavior in front of Toni's family. The situation reached a critical point when one day Toni returned home with a split lip and a missing front tooth. Dana, Toni's mother, immediately understood that this was Victoria's doing and declared her intention to call the police. However, Toni begged her mother not to do so, fearing that Victoria, who had already reached adulthood, would receive a severe punishment. Casey, Toni's father, noticing his daughter's injuries and scratches on Victoria's face, suspected that something serious was happening. But the couple insisted that the injuries were received during a fight at a party, and the topic was closed. Toni's grandmother recalled, "Victoria knew how to manipulate all of us. She knew what to say." After the incident with the knocked-out tooth, Toni's best friend Lacey was sure that this would be the turning point and Toni would finally leave Victoria. But Toni acted as if nothing had happened, and the couple continued to be together. By 2014, Toni and Victoria had been together for 5 years. They often traveled to Ogden to visit Victoria's relatives. Ogden had a reputation as a dangerous city with problems of gangs, crime, and drugs. It was during one of these trips that an event occurred that led to a tragic outcome. On October 17, 2014, the girls, along with Lacey, attended a party in Ogden. Throughout the evening, Victoria spent a lot of time in the bathroom and then suddenly insisted that everyone leave. The evening ended prematurely, and the girls got into the car to return home. Victoria sat in the back seat, still clearly angry about something that seemed incomprehensible to others. Toni drove Lacey home. "I love you," Lacey said goodbye. "I love you too," Toni replied. This was the last time the best friends saw each other. What happened next remains not fully understood, but according to Victoria, another argument broke out between her and Toni. This time Victoria pulled out a knife. She began stabbing Toni while she was driving. Toni managed to pull into a parking lot. There Victoria continued the attack, inflicting a total of almost 50 wounds on Toni. After this, Victoria called several people, including her friend Aaron, shortly after midnight on October 18th. She told him about what had happened. The police received the call and went to the scene. It remains unclear who exactly made the 911 call, but it is believed to have been someone Victoria had called. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, Victoria confessed that she had taken a 4-inch folding knife from her front pocket and struck Toni in a fit of anger during an argument. When asked by the police about the location of the weapon, she replied that the knife was still in the car. Toni was found in the car with numerous stab wounds all over her body. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation established that Victoria had moved Toni's body to the passenger seat and driven some distance before calling her friend. News of the tragedy spread quickly. On the morning of October 18th, Lacey called Dana, Toni's mother, and asked her to check her daughter's room. The room was empty, Toni's car was gone. Lacey reported that she had heard about something terrible that had happened to Toni. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, a police car stopped near the Baird family house. Dana was informed that her daughter, Toni, had been killed. Brutally murdered by the girl whom the family had welcomed into their home and supported in every way. The autopsy report showed that Toni had received 46 stab wounds at the hands of Victoria. The wounds were on her arms, forearms, face, head, neck, chest, and ears. Although none of the wounds was fatal on its own, Toni died from shock and blood loss. Experts noted that if Victoria had called an ambulance and tried to stop the bleeding, Toni might have been saved. Victoria Mendoza was arrested and placed in Weber County Jail. She was charged with first-degree murder. Initially, her bail was set at $100,000, but it was later canceled, and Victoria was denied the right to release on bail. During the preliminary hearing in February 2015, Victoria pleaded not guilty. She claimed that Toni had hit her, pulled her hair, and that she feared for her life. Her lawyer stated that she was in a state of stress and anxiety. During one of several outbursts of anger in court, Victoria stated that everyone was against her and that she was being threatened by the victim's family. At another moment, she said, I'll just kill myself. Then you won't have to worry about me." In a final display of self-pity, addressing the Baird family, she complained about hurt feelings. "Everything they said really hurts me." On November 10, 2015, given the compelling evidence against her, Victoria's lawyer advised her to change her plea to guilty. Prosecutors noted that it remained unclear exactly what had happened in the car. Although Victoria initially claimed that she was driving the car at the time of the attack, the nature of the knife wounds on the right side of Toni's body indicated that Toni herself was behind the wheel. A trail of blood on the dashboard showed that at some point Victoria had moved from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. During the sentencing, Victoria Mendoza's sister, Cindy Spencer, gave testimony. She recounted that Victoria had called her and said she had harmed Toni. Cindy and her husband came to the church parking lot where Victoria pointed out the car. According to Spencer, her sister was in shock. Defense attorney Michael Studebaker asked who had the upper hand in the relationship. Spencer replied, "Toni, because she had a car, phone, and was receiving money from her family." She also claimed that they were using prescription drugs and marijuana, although only marijuana was found in their systems. In her final statement, Victoria admitted, "I'm the only monster here." But her words seemed hollow. The truth came out when she, trying to sound remorseful, said, "I'm suffering too." In a room full of people whose lives she had destroyed, she couldn't help but remind everyone that she, Victoria, mattered too. During the victim impact statements, Toni's father pleaded for life imprisonment. Her aunt asked why Victoria should get even one more day with trees and sun when Toni couldn't. The court sentenced Victoria to imprisonment for 16 years to life for the murder of Toni Marie Baird. The judge explained that his hands were tied since the murder was not premeditated. Victoria is currently serving her sentence in Utah State Prison. Her first chance for parole is scheduled for October 2039. Toni's father, Casey, said, "I don't want the death penalty. I want her to suffer and have a lot of time to think about this. She's killing me too, very slowly. She should be tried again for the slow death of Toni's father and mother. I'll make sure she never sees the light of day again. She took my only girl." In 2020, Victoria found a new audience on TikTok and YouTube while in prison. Someone outside the prison was recording her calls and posting them on these platforms. She thanked her followers for their support. Utah State Prison removed these accounts. The tragic story of Tawnee Baird and Victoria Mendoza raises many questions about the nature of toxic relationships, domestic violence, and the juvenile justice system. Analyzing this case, several key points can be highlighted that require society's attention. First and foremost, this story demonstrates how early traumas and a difficult childhood can affect a person's behavior in the future. Victoria, who experienced her father's suicide and poverty, developed a number of behavioral problems that ultimately led to tragedy. This underscores the importance of early intervention and support for children with traumatic pasts. Secondly, the case shows how difficult it can be to recognize signs of abusive relationships, especially in the context of same-sex couples. Toni's friends and family noticed alarming signals but often didn't know how to respond properly. This points to the need for better education about signs of domestic violence and ways to intervene. The juvenile justice system also deserves critical analysis. The initial decision to place Toni, who had no serious offenses, in the same facility with teenagers with more serious problems, may have been a mistake. This decision effectively brought her together with Victoria, which ultimately led to tragic consequences. The role of social media in this story also deserves attention. Toni and Victoria used platforms to create an illusion of a perfect relationship, which made it difficult for others to recognize real problems. This emphasizes the need for a critical attitude towards what we see on social media and the importance of personal communication for understanding the real state of affairs. The Baird family's reaction to Toni's relationship with Victoria demonstrates the complexity of balancing support for a child's choice and protecting them from potential danger. Toni's parents tried to be open and accepting, but this may have prevented them from recognizing dangerous aspects of this relationship in time. The case also raises questions about how society views female violence. It is often believed that women are less prone to violent behavior, which can lead to underestimating risks in relationships between women. Victoria's attempts to use social media from prison point to the need for better regulation of prisoners' access to these platforms, especially in cases where it can cause additional pain to victims' families. The story of Toni and Victoria also highlights the importance of psychological help for people who have experienced trauma or have mental health problems. If Victoria had received proper help earlier, perhaps the tragedy could have been prevented. Finally, this case demonstrates how easily young people can fall into toxic relationships, especially when they are in a vulnerable state. This underscores the need for better education for teenagers about healthy relationships and recognizing signs of violence. Toni Baird's legacy continues to impact many lives. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussing issues of domestic violence and toxic relationships in the LGBTQ+ community. Some organizations use her story to teach young people to recognize early signs of abusive relationships. The Baird family, despite their pain, is trying to use this tragedy for positive change. They participate in domestic violence prevention programs and support initiatives aimed at helping young people in difficult life situations. Toni's friends, especially Lacey, have become active advocates for changes in the juvenile justice system and in approaches to combating domestic violence. They share their experiences to help others recognize warning signs in their loved ones' relationships. Schools and colleges in Utah have begun to pay more attention to education on healthy relationships and recognizing signs of violence. Toni's story is often used as an example of how important it is to be attentive to changes in the behavior of friends and loved ones. Law enforcement agencies and social services have revised their protocols for responding to cases of domestic violence, especially in the context of same-sex couples. Increased attention is paid to training employees to recognize less obvious forms of violence and control. Almost 10 years have passed since that tragic day when Toni Baird's life was cut short. Much has changed during this time, but her memory continues to live on. Victoria Mendoza is now serving her sentence in Utah State Prison. Her first chance for parole will come only in 2039 when she will be 47 years old. During her imprisonment, Victoria has gone through several rehabilitation and psychological assistance programs. However, her attempts to use social media from prison have caused new controversies and pain for the Baird family. Toni's family continues to struggle with the loss. Dana and Casey Baird have become active participants in the movement against domestic violence. They regularly speak at events, sharing their daughter's story, trying to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Their work has helped many families recognize signs of toxic relationships and intervene in time. Lacey, Toni's best friend, founded a nonprofit organization that works with teenagers, teaching them to recognize signs of unhealthy relationships. She often mentions Toni in her speeches, talking about how important it is to trust your intuition and not ignore warning signs. Utah state legislation has undergone changes after this tragedy. New laws have been passed that strengthen penalties for domestic violence and expand support programs for victims. Special attention is paid to training law enforcement officers and social workers to recognize signs of violence in LGBTQ+ couples. The juvenile justice system in the state has also undergone reforms. Now more attention is paid to an individual approach to each case, with the aim of avoiding situations where teenagers with minor offenses end up in the same facility as those who have serious problems with the law. Toni's story has become part of the curriculum in Utah schools and colleges. It is used as an example of how quickly relationships can turn from romantic to dangerous, and how important it is to seek help in time. Social networks, which played a significant role in creating the illusion of an ideal relationship between Toni and Victoria, are now actively used to spread information about signs of abusive relationships. Campaigns on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook help young people recognize warning signs in their own and others' relationships. Toni's musical legacy also lives on. Her friends collected and published a compilation of psalms she had written. These psalms have become a symbol of unrealized potential and a reminder of the importance of protecting young talents from violence. The tragedy of Tawnee Baird has left a deep mark on the hearts of many people. It reminds us of the fragility of human life and how quickly toxic relationships can grow into something much more terrifying. But at the same time, her story has become a catalyst for positive changes, prompting society to pay more attention to the problem of domestic violence and the importance of healthy relationships. Toni's memory lives on not only in the memories of her loved ones but also in the lives that were saved thanks to increased awareness about domestic violence. Her story continues to teach us to value every moment of life and to be attentive to those around us. In a world where social media often creates an illusion of perfect life, Toni's story reminds us of the importance of genuine, deep connections and support. It calls on us to be more open, sensitive, and ready to help those who may find themselves in dangerous situations.